I was in an organization where quality control is a cost center, right? And IT is a cost center within a cost center. So to try to get funding for anything required a long decision process. Suddenly I move over to sales. What does sales do? Sales generates revenue, right? So where I might have needed several months to get approval on $250,000 worth of spending, if I ever got it in quality control, I wrote 3 pages on a request to my boss one time as to why I wanted these funds. He kind of looked at it, turned to the last page, signed it, authorized it, and I said, "Did I have to write this?" He goes, and he looked at me and he said, "For $250,000? No." And it was like, oh my God, this is a completely different world. And so sales had money. Sales was comfortable with risk. And what sales really wanted to do all the time was move as fast as possible. And so what happened is, I don't know how much I changed. I mean, it's impossible for us to understand our personal evolution. You're deep into it, right? But what I do know that changed is the environment in which I was working changed significantly. And suddenly my career just exploded. I got promoted 5 times in 10 years and shot up from manager to executive director. And a lot of that has to do that I made that transition and I was in the right organization for who I am as an individual. And I think that's, when we're thinking about this conversation that we were going to have, that's the first time that I knew this was the right place, right? This is, I'm working in the right organization.
Welcome to Titans of Transition, featuring real-life stories, anecdotes, and inspiration about pivotal career moments from leaders who have been there. Join host Joe Miller, former scientist and senior technology leader turned executive coach, as he unpacks transitional moments to help inspire change.
Ed, welcome to Titans of Transition podcast. Really glad you're here today.
Yeah, I'm glad to join you, Joe. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, so, you and I talked offline. Of course, I've known you for years, and we'll get into that a little bit as we go through our conversation. But for those who are dropping in maybe for the first time, just a little bit of a framing here for what this podcast is all about. And really what I'm doing is trying to spawn some conversations with notable leaders and actually with anyone who has an interesting journey and story to tell about transitions in their life. And one of the key things I want to do is try to call out or pull out some key principles and learnings from all these different individuals. Ed, you're up today, and really to provide a resource for those who are either going through a transition that they are intending to do, that they've thought about doing for a while, or maybe as it is today, as we're in the middle of the pandemic still, in August of 2020, that there might be some transitions that have been thrust upon you. So there are principles, and I know Ed's got some great things to share. So without further ado, Ed, I'm going to jump in and say, hey, tell us a little bit about the beginning of your journey and how your career and your life started out maybe after school.
Sure. It's funny you mentioned school. I was thinking about how to start this, and I graduated college at 20 years old, so a bit younger than your average person. And as I was finishing up in my last semester, I interviewed on campus with Pfizer and landed the job and started at Pfizer's Brooklyn plant. And, was thinking now that I look back on it, a 20-year-old young man going to work for this company. By the way, no one knew who Pfizer was back then. When I told people I worked for Pfizer, one person thought it was a faucet company, as in Pfister. Literally nobody knew who Pfizer was. It was like a run-of-the-mill, no-name pharmaceutical company, right? It just was not anything exciting in 1982, but it was literally the best place I could have ever landed. I started working, I was always in technology. I ended up working there for 29 years. I actually thought when I started after a bunch of years, I thought actually I would work there my whole career and retire. Never thought I would leave any place, because that's how fabulous it was when I was working there. So I was in IT, but I was supporting the quality control division. And what the quality control division did for Pfizer at the time, it was a separate organization outside of manufacturing. Now I think you'll find those organizations as part of manufacturing, but back then it was its own division providing oversight on manufacturing. So I got a chance to do all this hands-on work in the beginning. I learned all about, I was a programmer, I was a COBOL programmer back then. So got to write code, got to do all this stuff, worked in Brooklyn for a few years, and then transferred over to our New York headquarters and was working there for a while. And
that's in Manhattan, is it not?
It is, yes, it is. It is in Manhattan. And still, we're kind of a sleepy pharmaceutical company. Very few people know about us. And I'm learning things. I got to put in the first local area network for our organization, which was fun. And back then, you kind of learned how to do it yourself, and you did it. And the job progressed from being programming primarily to being more of a project lead and project manager and less programming. But overall, I was, if you look back on it, I was in the quality control division for about 15 years. And even after those 15 years, I was a manager. So slow career progression as I look back on it. And then, and when I think about that, it's okay. If I think about the traits, who I am as a person, I like to move fast. I am comfortable with risk. And then I think about the quality control organization. They couldn't be more opposite, right? They are risk averse. They don't want to do anything fast.
And they need to be.
Yeah. Right. And then the whole, what we all know in biotech world is the computer systems validation, CFR Part 11. It didn't exist when I started. It was created in the 80s, in 1986, 87, and so on. It became a thing. You had to now validate your systems.
Hey, Ed, so let's stop for a second. Just kind of for those who might not be as familiar with that, not be in the same industry.
Oh, right.
It's a form of testing, but it's a very robust form of testing that includes not just exercising programs or different procedures you're running, but it incorporates a whole lot more. So maybe just take a minute and orient.
Yeah, I think back in the early days, we used to say it's a SOP-driven methodology that proves that your system does what it purports to do. And so you create a framework that says this technology is going to do the following. There will be the following inputs. When I do these tests, I expect the following outputs. And you have a framework around that says every time I make a change and there's a change control that's issued, I will have to redo this validation and say, this test still comes out the way I expected. And it's documented, and it's signed, and it's filed. And if the FDA comes in to review your systems, you have to be able to produce that evidence.
And it's so critical because, people don't often think about the laboratories. Probably they envision drug manufacturers, and in their minds, they see manufacturing lines. They think about the product when they're holding it in their hands, but actually the approval process and ensuring that drug is safe is according to these SOPs. And if something has gone wrong, if you haven't paid attention, you could potentially release something into the market.
So I bring that up only because, one of the stories I like to tell is, you can imagine we had a whole host of technologies out there and none of it had these procedures or documentation. I literally spent the entire year of 1987 writing documentation.
Are you the guy likes to move fast?
Yes, right. So that's important for you to understand how I love the organization. It was full of great people. I was given the opportunity to learn so much, but at the same time, I could see the inherent issues with me working there and so on. And then suddenly there was an opening in the sales organization. So through my internal network at Pfizer, I found out about this opening, supporting still IT, but supporting the sales organization. And I slid over to the sales organization. And Joe, I got to tell you, it almost felt like I changed companies, because now I was in an organization where quality control is a cost center, right? And IT is a cost center within a cost center. So to try to get funding for anything required a long decision process. Suddenly I move over to sales. What does sales do? Sales generates revenue, right? So where I might have needed several months to get approval on $250,000 worth of spending, if I ever got it in quality control, I wrote 3 pages on a request to my boss one time as to why I wanted these funds. He kind of looked at it, turned to the last page, signed it, authorized it, and I said, "Did I have to write this?" He goes, and he looked at me and he said, "For $250,000? No." And it was like, oh my God, this is a completely different world. And so sales had money, sales was comfortable with risk, and what sales really wanted to do all the time was move as fast as possible. And so what happened is, I don't know how much I changed. I mean, it's impossible for us to understand our personal evolution. You're deep into it, right? But what I do know that changed is the environment in which I was working changed significantly. And suddenly my career just exploded. I got promoted 5 times in 10 years and shot up from manager to executive director. And a lot of that has to do that I made that transition and I was in the right organization for who I am as an individual. And I think that's, when we're thinking about this conversation that we were going to have, that's the first time that I knew this was the right place, right? This is, I'm working in the right organization.
Oh, that's really huge. That's a huge principle that popped out. I'm just curious, when you were actually going through that transition, when you moved from quality control into sales, was there a point in time where you thought, I need to move? Or was there a moment or some specific issue that caused you to say to yourself?
Yeah, I was the Pfizer. It's a good company in that it had internal postings, right? So you could always go to this. At first, it was paper, and then it was available more on a computerized basis. But you could always look at the job postings and see what was available. And I was looking for opportunity. I had, as a matter of fact, I kind of glossed over this, but I had moved from quality control over to our hospital products organization, looking for a different environment. And that didn't work out for me for a whole bunch of reasons. And then I actually left Pfizer in the middle of this and went to Bankers Trust. And I was in a completely different culture when I did that. And it was it's a Wall Street company. And boy, you went from the kind organization that Pfizer was to cutthroat. I'm sorry, there's no other way to say it. Mm-hmm. And I lasted there 50 weeks. It just happened. I don't even say a year. I know exactly that it was 50 weeks. So, and by the way, that was 30 years ago? And I still know that it was 50 weeks. So luckily for me, my old boss in quality control called and just to check in on me. And I told them I was unhappy and going to be leaving. And they created a job for me in quality control to come back.
Oh, wow.
So once I got back, that's, I started learning a lot of things again. But to your point, yeah, at some point I realized I'm doing a lot of the same things over and over and over, and I'm maintaining a lot of the systems that I built. And there wasn't funding for a lot of new things. And so I felt like I was getting stale. So I was looking for opportunity, and then happened to hear about this opening in sales and moved over.
All right, so let's jump back on where you are in the timeline. So you're in sales and things are rocking and rolling.
We're doing great.
And you're like, wow, I don't know that I changed anything, but looks like I'm in the right spot for me. So take us forward a little bit.
Well, yeah. So wrapped in this whole conversation, we're talking about organizations within Pfizer. Wrapped in this whole conversation is the fact that Pfizer's culture was perfect for me, right? The culture of that organization, from the more sleepy little company it was in the 80s, even through the 90s when they were rip-roaring with revenue, it was the perfect culture. The leaders cared about you as an individual. Certainly the leaders I worked for, they thought about how to progress your career. They would, as good leaders, they would give you constructive feedback. Sometimes it was incredibly direct, but Joe, I knew they cared.
Mm-hmm.
So it was okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk openly about this because I know they are looking out for me. Then what kind of happened is Pfizer's R&D pipeline kind of went for, they kept going for home runs and they didn't hit them. And so the only way for that company to continue with its expected growth was to start going the M&A route. So in the span of 3 years, they acquired Warner Lambert, and then span of 8 years, Warner Lambert, Pharmacia, and then Wyeth. And when you acquire that many companies and that amount of headcount, well, you have too many people now.
Yeah.
So those of us in leadership positions were then tasked with right sizing or downsizing or whatever the appropriate term is, the organization. And that more and more over time, the ability to make things cost less became the critical attribute for you as a leader. And, in the beginning, we clearly had too many people, so, it seemed okay. But then later on, it was getting more and more aggressive in the cost reductions.
So you were getting kind of skilled in dealing with that situation.
I was getting a little too skilled with that. Yeah, there was, I have this perspective that when people would see me walk in the room, they knew that by the time that conversation ended, something was going to cost less, right? So whether that was vendor agreements that we had, offshoring models that we were aggressively moving to. So it started changing things. And right when we acquired the last of those 3 companies, when we acquired Wyeth, the CIO for Pfizer left the company. And he was one of my mentors. I had a few of them there, but he was a key one that kept challenging me to think in different ways. And one of those guys where I still know him today, and we actually still work together in independent capacities. But it's an individual who, I have this visual, Joe, where a leadership style where you have your arm around the guy and they know you care, right? But if they want to give you feedback, you're still very close, right? So they can give you that. They can give you that.
And direct too.
And that's the kind of relationship I had with this guy. And he left. And it was right as Wyeth was being acquired. So Wyeth had a CIO. So the Wyeth CIO became the Pfizer CIO. And then, as most leaders will do, he had some of his own people from Wyeth form parts of the leadership team or a significant part of the leadership team. And I was in that part. So next thing you know, I'm reporting into a leadership chain that is Wyeth. And there's nothing wrong with that other than they don't know who I am.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you rocketed up and, you did really well. You had this great mentoring from your boss, the CIO there, Pfizer. And then there's a new boss, there's a new team, there's a new culture potentially, I suppose. A lot of change.
Yeah. And it was, it wasn't the same for me. It felt different. And so within 2 years of the Wyeth acquisition, I left the company. Mm. And, I'm proud to be maybe one of the few people during that era executives that actually resigned. Most everybody else was downsized. If I'm anticipating your questions, is like what made me think it was time to go. To me, it's the foundational elements of the company, of what they needed their leaders to be, was difficult for me to succeed in. Mm-hmm. So I could do it, but it was changing who I was, not just as a leader, but actually as a human being, was changing me. And I didn't want to continue to do that.
Yeah, I think, you pointed out with your first transition of quality into the sales organization that, it was out of kilter or out of sync with who you were as a person, how you were wired. That was one of the things. And I think we can all be successful in almost any environment, but it takes a tremendous amount of energy to go against the grain, and is one way of saying it.
But also, I think if you think about the culture is the first foundational element, right? Then there's the organization you're working for, which is, I think, the difference, right? So Pfizer's culture was terrific. And then there's the traits of the organization I was supporting, which was quality control which was good until it was frustrating. And then sales, which was, boy, that was fun, right? So that was moving fast, learning at lightning speeds, and all these great things.
So you reached this point where you came to a conclusion just over time that this doesn't feel right anymore for me.
Yeah. And looking back on it, Joe, if I could just a side note, anybody that's reported to me throughout my career keeps in touch with me, right? So they will shoot me questions about, hey, I'm in this situation. One of my leaders from the early 2000s was recently offered a vice president job and wanted to talk to me about all aspects of the offer and the role before he accepted. That was someone that worked for me in 2003. Right? And certainly anybody that's worked for me in California, so I moved to California in 2012, we're in touch on a regular basis. Somebody in my network is in touch with me nearly every other week. The reason I bring that story up is that the last 2 years that I worked at Pfizer, those people that report to me don't talk to me at all. There is not an email. There is not a LinkedIn message. There is nothing. Right. And when I look back on that, it's not them. It's who I became. I became someone you don't want to be in touch with. Right. So the data is all there. It is such a hard break, 2010 to 2012.
So I'm going to drill into that a little bit. Ed, you said you became, what do you mean by that? Is it the things they were asking you to do because of the redundancies?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I used to joke around that when I started my day and opened up my laptop, the file that I fired up in Excel was my budget, because that's all anybody was going to talk to me about. And I was responsible for what was known as the Sales and Marketing Solutions Center globally. So I ran sales and marketing technology, the development and support of that technology globally. And the primary conversation I had was on making that cost less.
Okay. Yeah, that's not.
And that involves headcount. Yeah.
Change and move quickly. That's really out of joint. So you said that you left. So that's another inflection point. So talk to us about that and that shift.
Well, yeah. So this, if I can bring some of the personal aspects into it, right? I had just gotten remarried in 2010, and Phyllis and I, between the two of us, have 4 children. Back then, they were, ranging from high school to recent college graduates, and we weren't looking to move. I was looking for opportunities in and around the New York area. And ironically, my former CIO heard about this opportunity at Onyx and sent it over to me. He said, "Are you interested?" And I said, "Wow." And I read, the executive recruiter, what they were looking for, and I read the description. I said, "Everything sounds great, except it's in San Francisco." And he says, "Well, I'll just talk to them and see what it is." So I agreed to talk to them and had a good conversation with the recruiter. Then they flew me out to San Francisco, and my wife and I still remember this because after spending a day talking to the team, I had a break at the end of that day. I was interviewed for the whole day, and a break before we went out to dinner. And I called her and I said, "Uh-oh." And she said, "What?" I said, "This company is fabulous. Everybody I talked to is fabulous. Like fabulous as in what we remembered. Remembering the kind of company you wanted to work for." And so that all happened. We moved out to San Francisco in 2012 to work for Onyx, and it was like a massive reinvigoration of me. And Onyx was a growing biotech. They had a product on the market with Bayer. They had a a long shot phase 2 clinical trial that they had just submitted for multiple myeloma, a long shot to get that approved. And as soon as I got there, within 2 months, the FDA gave it a thumbs up. I was like, so we took off on this ride and we got to launch 2 products. And I can't explain how much fun that was, Joe. That was just a great company. And once again, to come back to the culture, right? The culture was exactly what I thrived in, caring leadership, growth, respect for people, all of these things that many companies have and they put on a placard in the conference room, but it's harder to live them, right? So when you see it in day-to-day action, it's a game changer for me.
Yeah, so you were, in many ways, coming home, even though you were moving away from your geographical home of multiple decades.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, because I had become very conscious that what I was seeking was culture, right? So I was very conscious as we went through, my search for a new opportunity of what that meant. As a matter of fact, during the middle of this all-day interview, I got to speak to the CEO, and that's the only thing we talked about. Because he said, "What do you want to talk to me about?" I said, "Culture." That's it. And I actually challenged him when he said, "Well, here's our values." And I asked him, "Well, how do you know that the company lives up to these values? How do you know it's just not a placard sitting in a conference room?" And we had this great discussion, and I felt like he really meant it. And he gave me some examples of the things he does to try to get reinforcement, while understanding that, he's still the CEO. So people sometimes might tell him what he wants to hear, but he was truly trying. And so I loved it.
Yeah, because that's a risk. Whenever you interview for a job, if they want you, they're trying to sell themselves, and so they can put whatever face on it, but to really get to, Yeah,
but and then the other part of that was I reported into the CFO. By the way, Joe, I'm leaving names out of this. I hope that's okay, right? Yeah. So if it seems like I'm being elusive, so I reported it to the CFO, and I couldn't be more thankful for being so lucky as to go from this difficult environment that I was in at Pfizer to working for the Onyx CFO. It was like, I just fell into this luck that is just incredible. I could still remember where he set up one-on-ones with me for an hour and a half each week. And I'm going to keep repeating, remember, he's the CFO, right? And the purpose of the one-on-ones was for me to catch up on company history. He went back to like 1990 something and said, here's what happened to the company, and we went along. And here's what some of our earlier stage trials were about. And here's what we have. Here's the current trials that we have underway. And here's what we're trying to do with this. And so he gave me this foundational element that in the first 2 months, I was like, bang, I know this company. I know it. I know what's gone on here. Obviously there's going to be some things where I got to fill in the blanks. And then, like a child that needed a pat on the back, like just regular positive reinforcements. Hey, I heard you were doing this. I heard you were doing that. I've heard this through the grapevine. I heard this. And I got feedback from the commercial team that they are really energized by the things that you might want to do for them. And it was like getting this reinforcement that, you are the leader that maybe you can be the leader you were once, right? And get it back. And it came roaring back. And that's the beauty of it. It's all there. It just needed to be in the right environment.
So roll it forward for us. So what happened? What happened next?
Well, there's a few things that before I talk about what happened, when I left Onyx, but there's a few things that I think that were important. One, I decided I was never going to mention, when I worked at Onyx, I was never going to mention Pfizer's name. And that had nothing to do with Pfizer or anything. It's just that as I got there, it was East Coast versus West Coast. It was big pharma versus small biotech. And I just started listening to people talk about someone else or some other person, oh yeah, that's a big pharma guy. He came in here, he doesn't have 1,000 people working for him, so he's struggling to get things done. There seemed to be this undercurrent. And so I just never, and what I mean by never mentioning Pfizer's name is if there was a situation where I was in a room and I had an idea based on my own experience, and obviously that experience is from Pfizer, I had my choice of how I could introduce my idea. I could introduce my idea by saying, hey, at Pfizer, here's what we did when this situation presented itself. Now, if I did that, everyone in the room would stop listening. It would basically be dismissed. Now, I'm not saying that's correct or incorrect, but it's true, right? So it doesn't matter. So the way I would introduce the idea is, hey, another way to approach this type of problem is to think about it like this. Now, I'm clearly drawing on my experience. That experience is clearly from Pfizer, but I've just never mentioned it. And that really worked out, so much so that I've used that whenever I've had a new big pharma individual join whatever company I'm in, I've given them the feedback to don't drop the name, let it go.
Yeah, I've experienced that being on the receiving end of it, and have caught myself down the road overusing previous, company names as well. So I think that's a good observation. Yeah, definitely.
And then the other thing, Joe, is that we had so much to deliver, right? We were suddenly launching multiple products. We had to put in these major systems like a new HR system, a new clinical trial management system, a new CRM. We were even upgrading our ERP. And so I remember going into the executive team with a slide that said, when driving 180 miles an hour, it's best not to have gnats in your eyes. And what I was trying to get across was these 4 or 5 major programs are the key of what we have to deliver. And so I needed their help because every organization was bringing up, hey, I got this little tiny system. It's going to benefit 4 people. It's really important. Somebody had written it into their goals, and so they're going to be compensated based on whether they were successful or not. Those are the gnats, right? So I had formed an IT steering committee, and what I was asking the executive team was, listen, the steering committee is doing a good job of clearing the gnats out, and we just need your support so the gnats don't come back, right? Because we are driving 180 miles an hour. And we did it. We delivered on all those major systems. And it was just a fun time.
And that's a key top leadership principle too, because within each function or department, there will be some things that are extremely important to that department. But you have to, I heard one of my bosses says, it's time to put your big boy pants on in terms of, or your big person pants on in terms of making the right call from an executive level, rather than something that might be really important to someone in a department or a business unit. That it's still important, but it's not at that level of importance. And it's, to your
exactly
point, it's a distraction.
There's a time and place for it, and maybe this isn't the right time.
Yeah, definitely.
So as luck would have it, Joe, I was working at Onyx. It was such a great company. I hired a bunch of leaders that when I look back on it, it was like, wow, what a leadership team I had. It's just, we were doing so many great things. And then we launched these 2 products, and I guess we did too well, right? Because Amgen took a look at the product set and said, hey, I think we'd like to own this. So Amgen bought the company. And so Amgen, the news hit in August of 2013, it closed in September of 2013. And by the end of the year, I transitioned out of Onyx. So I'd fallen into this nirvana, and then it was gone. Right? So the next transition wasn't really something of my choosing. If it was up to me, I would have worked at Onyx for the rest of my life. So now I'm on the market, and I'm in San Francisco of all places, right? So this is going to be different. And I started interviewing. I was interviewing for the CIO role at Gilead and going through the process. And while I was doing that, I was contacted by InterMune to come in and consult for them, give them some guidance, because they were expecting approval of their lead candidate, and we're going to launch it in the United States. So I came into InterMune, and InterMune at that time was maybe 200 people, and started seeing where they were and making some recommendations and so on. And after a while, suddenly 30 or 35 days of doing this, they told me, hey, can you just join us instead? And by that time, the interview process with Gilead had pretty much gotten down to the final steps. So, and so I had a choice. And I just felt that InterMune was more like Onyx in its stage. I was trying to recreate that, and that's how powerful that experience was. And they had their values written on their intranet site, and I remember grabbing those values and emailing it to my wife and saying, "Doesn't this sound familiar?" Right? Because it was almost exactly what Onyx had as its values.
Yeah, so that's a big one too, I think, for people listening, and that is sometimes you're looking at two potential opportunities, and then there's you do like risk, but there's the sure bet, right?
Yes.
But at this point in time, you learned enough about what worked well for you.
Right.
You made a call that I would say a lot of people out there will go, huh?
Right.
What'd you do that for?
Yeah. Because it certainly, from a notoriety perspective, being the CIO of Gilead certainly outshines being the CIO of InterMune. Right. So, and I don't doubt that for a second. And they've done incredibly well as a company. And let's fingers crossed that they continue to help us with this COVID-19 issue.
Definitely.
So go Gilead. But at the time, InterMune fit more into what I was seeking at the time. So I went to work for InterMune, and it was everything I thought it would be. It was great. And once again, it was a company getting ready to commercialize. So I dove, even though I was running the whole IT organization, I dove right back in to focusing on a launch, right? So here I am recreating, not even Onyx, recreating my days at Pfizer sales, right? Let's go do this, right? Let's go as fast as possible. You know how difficult it is to stand up a commercial IT infrastructure. I started there on May 1st. We launched October 1st.
It's amazing.
There was nothing in place.
It's crazy. And actually, I want to insert here, I've known you for years. We share membership in a CIO community that I still facilitate, although I've retired from a full-time work. But I remember a specific time when I came and visited you when you were in InterMune, and we had lunch, and we were talking about careers. And, I never thought I was going to do something like this, but I remember that. And I think you were towards the tail end of that process at that point in time.
Yeah.
But we grabbed a quick lunch, but it was clear you were running Warp 8 with your hair on fire.
Yeah. And once again, whether it's luck or I don't know what it is, it was just with a good group of leaders. And when I say that is certainly I'm in charge of the people I hire into IT, and we certainly did hire some good people into IT. But the commercial team and the finance team and the regulatory team, I mean, everybody was just cohesive, and or at least it felt cohesive. Remember, I was only there a few months before we launched, right? So if there was skeletons in that closet, I never found them. I didn't have time. Maybe they weren't any. I don't know. But we moved really great, and as par for the course, I was happy. Things were great. And then Roche bought us. Right? So
it's all over again, right?
All over again. Here we go.
But hey, it's not without some positive benefits.
It's a lot of positive things, right? So Roche buys us. So from the time Roche buys us, within five months or so, I'm out, right? And then got to decide what to do next. And as luck would have it, one of the leaders I'm most respected from Onyx she was the chief commercial officer at Onyx and was now the CEO of Halozyme Therapeutics. So she asked me to join her, and that company is in San Diego. So the transition that we're talking about is also relocating from San Francisco to San Diego. But also Halozyme back in 2015 was nowhere near being a commercial company. It was running a phase 2 trial. Now, certainly, we had hopes the phase 2 trial would be registrational. It turned out it was a successful trial, but didn't have the power to be a registrational trial. So we ran a phase 3 trial in pancreatic cancer. So for 4+ years, 4.5, nearly 5, I was in a clinical stage biotech. And what was fun about that, Joe, is up until that point, nearly everyone that was interested in me was primarily focused on my ability to deliver on a commercial launch. Right? That was the key thing that I could deliver for that company. Halozyme didn't need that. So even though I had it, they didn't need it. So I got to go there and really focus on the R&D side, and spend some time in the regulatory arena, the drug safety arena, the clinical side of things, even the QA side of things, and going all the way back to my roots in QA. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and just having worked in the same industry the orientation's completely different. I mean, this is much earlier on, and the driving force, the key top line goals of the company are really more the locus of focus is really upstream in research and preclinical, right? I mean,
Right.
it's so it is a shift. I mean, once you join these other companies, as you said, primarily because you had experience helping commercialize the organization and the IT support, the commercialization process. Once that happens, that's a whole different ballgame. So now you're joining a company that is really focused on that fundamental development of their products, and it's a very different feel.
Yeah, it is very different, and there was maybe layers of terminology where you might know the higher layers of that terminology, and then suddenly you have to know all of it, right? So you have to go diving into these groups and learning. And by the way, I don't want to just focus on R&D, right? Because remember, we thought we might have a chance to launch on a phase 2, so we started investing in our G&A side of things too. So I got to spend more time than I typically have in our HR side of things, and then in a legal contract, and maybe even in finance, and in addition to R&D. So it was kind of interesting not to have commercial hanging over your head as a focus area, where you can just focus on these other things. And then the other positive about it was the IT team was an infrastructure team. That's what I inherited, right? So the business side of IT, I got to build from the ground up. There was nobody there. So I got to bring in, and I brought in, to the point about networks, I brought in 2 legacy Onyx people that had worked for me at Onyx. Ironically, both were legacy Pfizer, but I didn't really know them very well at Pfizer. I knew their names, but I learned to respect their skill sets when they worked for me at Onyx. And so I brought them over to Halozyme, and those 2 individuals who were my senior leaders were worth their weight in gold. They were just amazing.
So it was different. It was a different focus, as we've talked about. You still want about the process, having to build the team, etc. But what was the reason you went there primarily? Because again, just in the event people don't know the industry that well, I mean, the Bay Area is a hotbed area for biotech. So I'm sure there was opportunities popping up. So
yes, there were certainly. Yeah, if I wanted to stay in the Bay Area, I could have. Yeah,
no problem.
There's a few reasons for that. One is personal. My wife went down to San Diego and probably within 6 hours wanted to move there. The other is the CEO. So a known entity as the leader of the company kind of ensures that the culture will be exactly what you expect to find, right? It's going to emanate down from that individual. So the culture was right. The timing was right. It was pancreatic cancer. So I wanted to help progress the treatment for that dreadful disease. So there was that as well. And also, I really enjoyed San Diego as well. So there was all these things. But we to your point, we were aware of the risk that if this failed, probably our next opportunity would stand a good chance of being somewhere else, and maybe back in the Bay Area. But we went for 4.5 years, and unfortunately, the trial did fail. And so that was back in the end of 2019. And so once again, as is key to all of my stories, within 60 days, I was out.
But at that point in time, you were out, but you also had something else that you didn't have when you went down there from a business standpoint, from an experience standpoint.
I had a knowledge of the entire biotech business model from beginning to end. Yeah. So what's interesting is now that as I sit down as a consultant is that I can have a conversation with every leader of every business function, from laboratories to finance and HR to commercial to medical and everything in between. And certainly there's certain groups I can go deeper. I'm not going to say I can go the same depth with all of them, but I can have a pretty good conversation with every functional leader of that company. And that is what my experience at Halozyme brought, amongst many other things.
And that's a huge value. And I mean, you and I talked about this offline before this, and the ability to have this conversation around the table. And relationships are so important in a function like IT to be successful, to actually help power the organization, the company forward, and support the company's goals. That as the head of IT, it isn't just a matter of coming in and having sort of a conversation on, a tick list. I mean, you really need to understand the business and the facets of the business for all those different functions.
Joe, you reminded me of something that I wanted to make sure I said during this conversation. My career took off two different times, right? Once in that early stage when I got into sales, and then when I got to be the Onyx CIO, and then the 3 CIO roles and the good success I've had while I've been out in California. Inherent in all that is the investment that Pfizer made in me as a leader and as a manager. There was one training course after another in leadership principles, in things known as courageous conversations, right? The best way to think about that is can we help build in you a skill set that allows you to argue a point without ever making it personal. And it is probably it's right up there. If it's not number one, it's one of the top 3 skill sets that were built in me, where I can have a conversation where it's all fact-based, data-driven. There's certainly opinions in there, but none of it will make you defensive in the way in which I deliver it, right? And that is, and then there was performance management, there's career development, all these 6-box and 9-box things that we learned back in the day at Pfizer on career development. That foundational element of who I am as a leader is 100% attributable to the training that the Pfizer organization gave me.
A big hat tip to them,
yep.
to the people involved in making sure they invested in their employees.
Yeah, because it's paid off, Joe, right? Especially the people development, right? So I think back to, I made this comment to you the other day. I think back to my leadership team at Onyx. Now, that team only reported to me for 2 years, 2012 and 2013. Every single person that reported to me at Onyx is now the head of IT at another company, another biotech. And that smile that you have on their face is exactly the smile I have when I see it, when I get the email from them that they got the job, right? Because we're usually in some level of conversation about their opportunities, especially the first one. And that just makes me happy. And by the way, the same thing is true of InterMune and is true of my senior leaders from Halozyme. So it's been a great way to see. Well, I think in the NFL they call it your coaching tree, right? Like Bill Parcells' coaching tree. He's got he's got a whole lot of good people in his coaching tree, including Mr. Belichick. But this coaching tree is doing incredibly well, and it just makes me, I feel like a proud papa at times.
So we didn't really talk about this too much, but spend a few minutes and kind of lay out what you're doing right now. You said you're doing some consulting for organizations. What type of organizations? Obviously, it's
I kind of, when I had to think about putting a label on it, I thought, okay, what I'm doing is IT strategy consulting, and who's my target audience? My target audience is emerging biotechs. So it's primarily those companies that are progressing their clinical trials. They feel they have a trial on the way that is registrational. They're going to submit to the FDA if the data is good, and they're going to hopefully launch that product. And somewhere in the next 18 months, they might be on the market. And so what I like to do is come into those organizations and do a full gap analysis of their business technology as well as their standard IT, but the business solutions that they have in place or don't have in place, and give them a gap analysis. I call that a heat map, and it indicates through colors where your gaps are. And then through conversation with them, we'll figure out how to address the gaps indicated by reds and yellows, how to address the gaps and how to do it over the course of the next year to 2 years so that they can optimize the resourcing and keeping an eye on change management. You don't want to change too many things at one time. If something can be postponed to post-launch, let's do that, right? Let's get that out of the way. And so I've done that for a handful of clients, and it's fun work because, it's the strategy and planning, and in some degree, it's like getting a sense of the entire drug development that's gone on and how they hope to launch it. And you're giving them help, you're helping them do that, and it's very rewarding.
And just from personal experience, because I have worked for a number of companies in this industry who kind of were in that space for a while, right? That smaller emerging. It's a very difficult challenge to get the right kind of level advice as what you provide, and not get either turned down for getting that advice because someone has in their mind they have to get some top firm to come in, which is too expensive for the company at that time.
Right.
So it's a great thing to do, I think. So
and I like to think I have
information in the fact
right.
here.
I like to think I have a little bit of a been there, done that credibility to it as well, right? So
hey, listen, what I want to do now, if we can, is let's distill down some of the key learnings for people. Again, the focus here is those that are going through transitions, think they might want to make a transition. You sprinkled some things came out, but I thought maybe we could take a few minutes and try to pull them back out.
Yeah. So during the course of the conversation, you heard me refer to culture. So I'm going to start with that as the foundational element. If you're thinking about a transition, I would think about what kind of company do I want to go work for? What's the culture that I'm seeking? And this, first of all, think about what's your time frame. Are you going to go, are you thinking about working there for just a short time, a long time? I know we can't project that, but if you think about the culture of what you're trying to achieve, that will help you understand which company is right for you. Now, you said something that I thought was critical. Sometimes hard to figure that out in an interview, right? But you should look for little things. I've been through interview processes with companies that I won't mention right now because they're well known. And I was interviewing at the executive level. And when I finished talking to the 6 or 7 people I had to talk to that day, the last person said, well, who do you got next? And I said, no one, I'm done. And they said, oh, okay, have a good day, and left. That happened not just once with this organization, but multiple times with this organization. Just left me in a conference room. HR didn't come back to get me. An admin didn't come back to get me. No one cared to escort me out the building. First of all, it's a horrible security risk, right? But it just was the clue about the culture I'm seeking. Like if that was me and I was the person interviewing the last candidate, and the last candidate said, I have nobody left. And I was like, all right, let me show you how to get back to your car. This is a big campus. Let me show you how to get back to your car. We'll find, okay. There's clues in certain things, right? And so, but you should also have your questions. I see a lot of candidates who, when asked what questions you have, they'll have, high level questions, but have questions that you might be able to poke at to find out cultural elements. Put them in the bucket of your questions, culture, have them ready, right? And you'll be able to find out some things. The other element of and I've applied this a few times, I've given it as advice to some other people as well, is if you're not learning, it's time to go. Mm. If you're learning, then learning is a reason to stay. There might be other reasons to go, but learning is a reason to stay. If you're learning, you're advancing your career. If you're not learning, you're just killing time. And there's no reason to kill time. So I think if you're, I would have put learning in there as well. But learning sometimes, people think, all right, I got to get the opportunity to learn. Learning, as you and I just discussed, Joe, earlier, is knowing the business that you're in. And sometimes that's a matter of inviting people out to lunch, pre-COVID days, inviting them out to lunch and picking their brain, talking to other people in other parts of the organization. Learn how different groups work. Learn the business you're in. If you're going to be in biotech, learn how biotech works. How does a drug go through development? How does it get submitted? What's drug safety all about? What does that mean, right? Learn these things. So I think that's, just some of the items that just come to mind.
I mean, I think the gnats in your eyes, that was one that's in my mind.
Yeah, and that's around delivery, right? So that's another foundational one, which is when you, even if earlier in your career, but certainly as you advance, when you make a commitment, deliver, right? And deliver on the ones that make a difference to the company, because no one will remember the other ones, right? So deliver on the ones that make the difference. That's what will get discussed at your performance review. That's what will get discussed at the executive team meetings. Deliver on the things that change the company, and change the company sometimes by giving it capabilities, but change the companies sometimes by just making the existing processes so efficient and so much improved that it have to be noticed. But when you decide that you're going to lead these efforts or lead this organization, figure out what you're going to deliver that year and do it. And get rid of the other things. They're excuses. So get those gnats out of your eyes and be open about the fact that you're not doing them, right? So somebody can't come back and say, hey, you were supposed to do these other things. No, I'm going to deliver these 4 things, and these things are gone. They're out of the way. And so I think that's a key one. And then the other item that we discussed is, if you're going to be a leader of organizations, then do it well, right? Care about the people that work for you. Hire good people. If you hire someone that's not a fit, make that change to get them out as quickly as possible, right? You'll know it almost immediately. Make the change as quickly as possible. When you hire the right people, invest in them, show them the way. Sometimes that's, with positive reinforcement. Sometimes it's with constructive feedback, but do it, because they'll understand what you're doing and be transparent about it, and it'll work out great.
The imagery you had of putting your arm around their shoulder.
Yeah.
You can,
right?
So they know that you're there for their good as well as the company's good. But they're going to talk to you directly so that you do succeed, and that's okay.
Yeah. And then other things like, I've seen you do this, and you do this very well, is, when you build out a network, you have to have a network where you reach out to individuals just to do that. You got nothing to ask. You're reaching out to say, hey, Joe, what you up to these days? And then the conversation goes on, leads to nothing other than the fact that Joe and I just had a conversation about where we are in our lives. This is great, right? There's going to come a time where I might have to ask Joe for help, right? But it's also back to that part about putting your arm around you, right? Hey, Joe, I'm not just going to talk to you when I need you. I'm going to talk to you because I want to talk to you. And that creates a different foundational element about what that network is about.
Yeah.
But how many times on LinkedIn has somebody just out of the blue, you haven't seen this person in 25 years, and say, hey, can you help me introduce me to this individual? It's like, how? I haven't talked to you in 25 years. What do you want me to say? I haven't talked to, here's this individual, I haven't talked to him in 25 years.
And I get it, I understand it, but I think people, one of the lessons along these lines that I've learned is that you have to be willing to step forward and give first into a relationship. Yes. And add value first, even if you're not going to get anything out of it. You may not have any reason to do that, but it's just kind of the wiring that I think both of us share that. Right. And that's one of the reasons, to your point, I commend you for this, that the example of these guys that you have mentored, your senior leaders now leading IT function, CIO level at these companies is huge, right? Yes. I mean, there's one thing to train someone and to be in touch with them still, and to the point where they have a new offer and they want to go through the terms of the offer with you. That is not trivial, and it doesn't come from someone who invests for an immediate return. It's not reciprocity based. It's not coming to you saying, I'm gonna pat you on the back so I can get something right away back from you. So
some of them are even achieving titles I never had. Like, yeah. One of them is now a senior vice president, and only at InterMune was I a senior vice president. Every other level I was a vice president, but now this one, it's pretty cool. They're going farther and faster. It's really neat.
Celebrate that fully. Yeah. So anyway, I think that's a great lesson. The other thing I wanted to come back on was that your journey obviously was through pharmaceutical and biotech, biopharma, but these principles that you talked about, they're universal. I think of knowing the business, for example, that's universal. I think about being respectful and how you deal with your colleagues and investing in the relationship. That's universal to any industry. Think about learning. That's universal, right? And learning the business so that you can have a conversation all the way around. That's universal as well. So all these things, they can be applied to any situation, whether it's in retail, banking, pharma, biopharma. It doesn't matter what you're doing. I think these are great points.
If I can give Pfizer one more pat on the back, the IT organization at Pfizer was actually called, when I was there, it was actually called Business Technology.
Nice.
Right, because the leaders of that formed that organization wanted everyone to understand that this was a technology team focused on the business. It wasn't a technology team focused on technology. Right? If you want to be a technologist, go to Silicon Valley. Right? If you're going to work in biotech and in pharmaceuticals, you better learn how that business works, because it's very different. Right? There's compliance aspects, whether, everybody has SOX compliance, but we have the good manufacturing practices or good clinical practices, all the GXPs in there. We have all of these compliance issues that you can't skip past them. Right? You have to focus on those items. So you have to know why they're important.
Ed, this has been a rich time. But I think our time has to wind down eventually here. So, hey, listen, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Really appreciate it. For those listening in, I will provide some links in the show notes for you can get in touch of Ed if you know someone who's interested in his consulting work. But once again, if you've enjoyed this and it's added value to you, please like and subscribe and rate us. I would really appreciate you doing that. So anyway, thanks again, Ed. It's been a great time.
I had a great time talking here, Joe. Thank you very much.